The man who bought my father's watch for $40 called me 3 days after the estate sale and asked a question that made my hands go cold. Are you aware there's a bank key sewn underneath the leather strap? At first, I thought he had the wrong number. My father's watch was not valuable. It was a scratched stainless steel Hamilton with a cloudy face, a stiff winding crown, and a brown leather band darkened by decades of sweat and machine oil. He had worn it every day for as long as I could remember. He wore it to work, to church, to my high school graduation, and to the hospital the night my mother died. My sisters sold it before I even knew they had opened the house to buyers. $40. That was what they decided 38 years of our father's life was worth. The buyer told me he had removed the strap because he planned to replace it. Beneath the folded leather, hidden inside a narrow line of hand stitching, he found a tiny brass key wrapped in waxed paper. Stamped into the metal were 3 characters, C17. He also found something else, a strip of paper so thin and faded that he almost threw it away. It contained my name, not my sisters' names, mine. I did not know what the key opened, why my father had hidden it inside the watch, or why my sisters had been so determined to sell his belongings before the probate court had even appointed an executor. But I was about to learn that the watch was not the only thing they had tried to dispose of, and the greatest betrayal did not begin after my father died. It had begun almost 6 years earlier, inside a quiet bank office with a signature that looked almost exactly like his. Good day, dear listeners. It's Nora again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please subscribe to my channel and like this video, and also let me know in the comments which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. My name is Helen Mercer. I was 47 years old when my father died, and I worked as a billing compliance supervisor for a regional hospital network in St. Louis. It was not glamorous work, but I was good at it. I spent my days reviewing numbers that did not agree with one another, duplicate charges, incorrect patient codes, missing authorizations, payments applied to the wrong account. Most errors were ordinary. Someone typed a 7 instead of a 1. Someone overlooked a line in a contract. Someone sent an invoice twice. But every now and then, a mistake was not a mistake. It was a pattern, and patterns have always bothered me more than individual lies. A lie can be emotional. A pattern is organized. By the time my father died, I had been divorced for 4 years. I lived alone in a modest brick house with a narrow backyard, 2 maple trees, and a kitchen that always seemed too quiet after 7 in the evening. My marriage had not ended dramatically. There was no affair, no broken furniture, no screaming in the driveway. My husband simply decided that our life together felt smaller than the life he imagined for himself. He moved to Colorado with a woman from his consulting firm. I kept the house, my job, and the habit of making coffee for 2 people. For a long time, I would pour the second cup before remembering there was nobody to drink it. My father, Walter, was the person who helped me through that period. He was not a man who spoke easily about emotions. He had spent 34 years maintaining industrial elevators. He trusted tools, schedules, and things that could be repaired with the correct part. When I told him my marriage was over, he came to my house with a toolbox. He tightened the loose handle on my back door, replaced a cracked switch plate, and fixed a drawer that had been sticking since I moved in. Then he sat at my kitchen table and said, "Some things break because they were badly built. That doesn't mean you failed to maintain them." That was my father's version of comfort. My older sister, Diane, lived in Kansas City with her husband, Richard. She had always been polished, organized, and socially skilled. She remembered birthdays, sent expensive flowers, and knew how to make concern sound like authority. My younger sister, Melissa, lived 20 minutes from my father. She had been divorced twice and changed jobs frequently. She could be affectionate one day and unreachable the next. Money moved through her hands as if it were trying to escape. I loved both of them, but our relationships had become strained after our mother died. My mother had been the soft center of our family. Without her, every conversation became sharper. My father remained in the same 2-story house in Kirkwood where we had grown up. It was not a grand house, but it sat on a desirable corner lot. The neighborhood had changed around it. Small homes were being renovated, expanded, or torn down. Real estate agents left handwritten notes in his mailbox offering cash. He ignored them all. "That house knows me," he once said. During the final 2 years of his life, his health declined slowly. He developed congestive heart failure and needed help with medications, appointments, and groceries. Melissa was geographically closest, so she handled many of the daily errands. Diane managed phone calls, insurance forms, and what she called the bigger picture. I visited every Wednesday evening and most Saturdays. I cleaned his refrigerator, reviewed his prescriptions, and brought him low-sodium meals he pretended to dislike. Sometimes we watched baseball without speaking. Sometimes he told me stories I had heard before. He remained mentally sharp until the final month. That point matters. It mattered later in ways I could not yet understand. 6 weeks before he died, I noticed that my father had become anxious about his mail. Not all of it, only the envelopes from Midland Heritage Bank. Midland was an old regional bank with marble floors, dark wood desks, and brass lamps that made every transaction feel more important than it probably was. My father had banked there since the 1970s. One Wednesday, I arrived while he was standing at the kitchen counter, holding a torn envelope. When he heard me, he folded the paper quickly and slid it beneath a grocery circular. "Something wrong?" I asked. "No, you look upset. I'm old. Old people look upset even when we're thinking about soup." That was the kind of answer he gave when he did not want to be questioned. I opened the refrigerator and noticed 3 unopened containers of food from the previous week. "You haven't been eating." "I eat." "Crackers aren't dinner. They are if you eat enough of them." I let the subject go, but while I was putting away groceries, the corner of the bank letter remained visible beneath the circular. There was a number printed near the top, $286,400. I could not tell whether it was a balance, a transaction, or a loan amount. My father had never been wealthy. He had a pension, Social Security, and savings he had accumulated carefully. He owned the house outright. I knew he was comfortable, but $286,000 was more cash than I expected him to have in any one account. When I turned around, he had already taken the paper upstairs. The following Saturday, I found him in the basement, standing in front of his old metal workbench. He had removed the bottom drawer and placed it on the floor. Behind it was a shallow opening in the wall. "What are you doing?" I asked. He startled so badly that he struck his shoulder against the shelf. "Looking for a drill bit." "In the wall?" He gave me a tired smile. "The older you get, the stranger your filing system becomes." There was dust on his sleeves and a small red folder on the bench. Before I could see what was inside, he closed it. Then he reached for my hand. His fingers were cold. "Helen, you still keep records at work?" "Every day." "For how long?" "Depends on the record." He nodded, as though I had confirmed something important. "Never trust one copy," he said. I thought he was confused. He was not. 2 weeks later, Diane called me during lunch. Her voice was calm, but there was tension underneath it. "Dad's bank called Melissa." "Why would the bank call Melissa?" "She's listed as his financial contact." "Since when?" "Dad signed some updated paperwork." "What paperwork?" "A power of attorney." "Maybe account access." "I don't know exactly." I put down my fork. Dad never mentioned giving Melissa power of attorney. He didn't have to discuss every decision with us. "No, but he asked me last month to review a hospital bill because he didn't trust the adjustment. He would have mentioned turning over his finances." Diane sighed. "You always think there's a mystery because you work in compliance." "I work in compliance because unexplained changes matter." "He is 81 years old, Helen. Melissa is nearby. Stop making this more dramatic than it is." The conversation stayed with me. That evening, I called my father. "Did you give Melissa power of attorney?" There was silence. Then he asked, "Diane." More silence. "I signed something," he said carefully. "What?" "Temporary assistance." "Did a lawyer prepare it?" "The bank had forms." "Did you understand what you signed?" His voice hardened. "I may be old, but I'm not incompetent." "I didn't say you were." "You were thinking it." "No. I was thinking Melissa has had financial problems, and I want to make sure you're protected." He lowered his voice. "Come Saturday." Alone. But Saturday never came. At 4:20 the next morning, Melissa called to tell me our father had been taken to the hospital. By the time I arrived, he was unconscious. He died that afternoon. His watch was still on his wrist. I remember that clearly because I held his hand while the nurse disconnected the monitors. The watch face had stopped at 3:12, though the official time of death was 2:47. Melissa asked the nurse if she could take his personal belongings. The nurse placed his wallet, keys, wedding ring, and watch in a clear plastic bag. I assumed those items would stay together until we discussed them. That was my first mistake. The funeral took place 5 days later. Diane arranged everything efficiently. The flowers were white. The music was restrained. The obituary described my father as devoted, hardworking, and beloved. All of those things were true. What it did not say was that his daughters had barely spoken in private since his death. Whenever I asked about the will, Diane told me we would discuss it after the service. Whenever I asked about the bank papers, Melissa said she was too overwhelmed. 3 days after the funeral, I drove to my father's house and found cars parked along both sides of the street. A cardboard sign in the yard read, "Estate sale. Everything must go." For a moment, I thought I had gone to the wrong house. People were carrying out lamps, boxes of dishes, framed pictures, and my father's tools. I found Diane in the dining room speaking with a woman who was pricing furniture. "What is this?" I asked. Her expression changed only slightly. "We're clearing the house. Without telling me, we sent you a message." "No, you didn't. You probably missed it." I took out my phone and opened our family thread. There was no message. Melissa appeared from the hallway holding a roll of price stickers. "We had to move quickly," she said. "The realtor says timing matters." "What realtor?" They exchanged a look. That was when I saw the empty patch on the wall where my mother's clock had hung for 30 years. The room felt wrong without it. "Where are Dad's personal effects from the hospital?" I asked. Melissa looked down at the stickers. "We sorted everything." "Where is his watch?" "I sold it." My mouth went dry. "You sold Dad's watch?" "It didn't work." "That doesn't matter. It was just an old watch, Helen." "How much?" She hesitated. $40. I stood there for a long time. Around us, strangers opened cabinets and discussed prices. Someone laughed in the kitchen. A child pressed the keys of my mother's piano while his father asked whether delivery was included. Diane touched my arm. "Don't create a scene." I moved away from her hand. "You sold his belongings before probate. We're the beneficiaries," she said. "All 3 of us are beneficiaries." Another pause. Diane's face became careful. "We haven't found a formal will. Dad had a will. He may have had an old one. Nothing current." "What about the red folder in the basement?" Melissa answered too quickly. "There wasn't a red folder." That was when I understood that one of them had seen it. I did not shout. I did not stop the sale. I walked through the house once, taking photographs with my phone. Empty shelves, open drawers, boxes marked for donation, the removed workbench drawer in the basement. The shallow opening behind it had been covered with a new piece of plywood. I photographed that too. Then I left. The buyer called me 3 days later. His name was Samuel Price. He was a retired high school history teacher who collected old mechanical watches. He had found my number on a funeral card tucked into the watch box Melissa gave him. "I hope I'm not causing trouble," he said. "You're not." I assumed the stitching was a repair, but it was too neat. Whoever did it wanted the leather to look untouched. He sent me photographs. The brass key was less than 2 inches long. The waxed paper around it had been flattened by years of wear. The strip with my name appeared to have been cut from an index card. Helen Mercer. Beneath my name were 4 numbers. "Can I buy the watch back from you?" I asked. "You don't need to buy it. It belonged to your father. I will pay you. $40 is not going to improve my retirement." The next afternoon, we met at a coffee shop near Forest Park. Samuel was in his late 60s, with silver hair and the gentle manner of someone accustomed to waiting for students to finish speaking. He placed the watch, key, and paper on the table between us. "I polished nothing," he said. "I thought you might need it as I found it." That sentence told me he understood the possibility of evidence. I thanked him and asked him to write a brief statement describing when and how he discovered the key. He raised an eyebrow. "You work in law?" "Hospital billing compliance. Close enough to know that memories change. Records don't." He wrote the statement on a page from my legal pad. He included the date, time, location, and condition of the watch. I photographed his driver's license with his permission and gave him my contact information. When I returned to my car, I locked the doors and sat with the key in my palm. C17. The numbers on the paper could have been a date, September 17th, a code, a password, a box number. I called Midland Heritage Bank. The representative would not discuss my father's accounts because I was not an authorized party or court-appointed representative. Does your bank have safe deposit boxes identified by a letter and number? I asked. I can't provide information about our security systems. I'm not asking whether my father rented one. I'm sorry, you'll need estate documentation. The answer was formal, but it was not a denial. That evening, I placed the watch in a zippered evidence pouch from my office supply cabinet. I stored the key separately, printed Samuel's photographs, and wrote a timeline. My father's strange bank letter, the opening behind the workbench, his warning to keep more than one copy, the power of attorney, the rushed estate sale, the missing red folder, the key. Fear is strange. It does not always make you small. Sometimes it makes the world very precise. I noticed the hum of my refrigerator, the condensation on my water glass, the porch light reflecting in the black kitchen window. I also noticed that Diane had called 4 times. I did not return her calls. Instead, I searched the Missouri court database for my father's name. No probate case had been filed. Then I searched property records. The house was still titled solely in my father's name, but there was a recorded deed document from 11 months earlier, a beneficiary deed. According to the county index, the house would transfer at death to Diane Mercer Collins and Melissa Mercer Shaw. My name was not listed. I downloaded the document. The signature looked like my father's, almost. The W in Walter leaned too far forward. The final R stopped abruptly. His real signature had a small upward stroke because of an old hand injury. The beneficiary deed did not. It had been notarized by a woman named Elaine Rusk. The document had been prepared by Calder, Wren, and Pike, a law firm whose senior partner, Jonathan Calder, served on the advisory board of Midland Heritage Bank. That was the first pattern. The next morning, I called a probate attorney named Evelyn Ross. I found her through a colleague whose mother's estate had been contested. Evelyn's office was above a pharmacy in Clayton, with old wood floors and books stacked on every available surface. She was 60, direct, and unimpressed by drama. I brought a binder. She looked at it and said, "You're either very organized or very frightened. Both." I showed her the photographs, the deed, Samuel's statement, and my timeline. She examined the key through a small magnifying glass. Safe deposit keys often have identifying codes, but not always a direct box number. We'll need authority from the probate court before the bank cooperates. My sisters are selling everything. Then we file immediately. Can we stop the house transfer? If we show a credible basis. To challenge the deed, we can seek a temporary restraining order. I pointed to my father's signature. This isn't right. Are you qualified to authenticate handwriting? No. Then say it concerns you. Don't say it's forged until an expert says it's forged. That was the first lesson Evelyn gave me. Facts become weaker when you stretch them beyond what they can prove. She filed a petition to open probate and requested that a neutral public administrator be appointed temporarily because of the conflict among the heirs. She also filed notice of a potential challenge to the beneficiary deed and demanded that Diane and Melissa preserve all documents, devices, communications, and estate property. The preservation letter changed everything. My sisters had ignored my calls for days. Now Diane called within an hour. "Helen, what have you done?" "I hired an attorney. You filed against us." "I filed to protect Dad's estate. There is no estate dispute. There was an unauthorized sale. We were trying to reduce expenses." "What expenses?" "The house is paid off. Utilities, taxes, insurance, maintenance." "Then send me the records." Her voice became softer. "This is grief talking." "No, Diane. Grief is why I cried at the funeral. Records are why I hired a lawyer. You're going to destroy this family over an old house." I looked at the bank key lying on my desk. "I don't think this is about the house." There was silence. Then she asked, "What does that mean?" It was the smallest change in her voice, but I heard it. She was afraid I had found something. "I'll communicate through Evelyn," I said. "Helen." I ended the call. 2 days later, someone entered my father's house after the probate notice had been posted. The temporary administrator had changed the locks, but a rear basement window was broken. Nothing obvious had been taken because most of the house was already empty. The plywood behind the workbench had been removed. Whoever entered had gone directly to the hiding place. Evelyn asked the police to document the scene. The responding officer called it possible vandalism, but he photographed the footprints and broken latch. Inside the wall cavity, we found one thing my sisters had missed: a torn corner of red cardboard. The folder had existed. Evelyn obtained an emergency order preventing the sale or transfer of the house. The judge also ordered Diane and Melissa to provide an inventory of all property removed, sold, donated, or destroyed after my father's death. Their first inventory was 7 pages long. My own photographs from the estate sale showed at least 20 items not listed: my mother's piano, my father's tool chest, a collection of silver coins, 2 antique rifles, his wedding ring, and the watch. When Evelyn raised the omissions, Diane's attorney called them clerical errors. His name was Jonathan Calder, the same lawyer whose firm prepared the beneficiary deed. He was in his mid-50s, silver at the temples, with the smooth voice of a man who rarely needed to repeat himself. He sent Evelyn a letter describing my challenge as an emotionally driven misunderstanding. Among grieving siblings, he offered a solution. Diane and Melissa would pay me $25,000 in exchange for dismissing the probate challenge and releasing any claim against the house. Evelyn read the letter twice. "What does the offer tell you?" she asked. "They want this finished quickly." "Exactly. Should I reject it?" "Not yet. We request documents first. Through the court-appointed administrator, we serve subpoenas on Midland Heritage Bank, Calder's law firm, the notary, and the company that conducted the estate sale." The bank resisted. It claimed privacy obligations and said it needed more specific authority. Evelyn returned to court and obtained an order directing the bank to identify all accounts, vault services, safe deposit arrangements, and fiduciary documents associated with my father. 3 weeks later, the bank's response arrived in a sealed packet. My father had maintained 3 ordinary accounts: a checking account with $4,811, a savings account with $17,602, a certificate of deposit worth $51,000. Those figures were consistent with what I expected. But there had also been an investment custodial account. 6 years earlier, it held $614,000. The account had been liquidated in stages. Most of the money was transferred to an entity called WMS Property Holdings, LLC. The initials matched my father's name, Walter Michael Mercer, but he had never owned a company. The registered agent for WMS Property Holdings was Jonathan Calder. I sat there for a long time. Evelyn traced the transfers with her finger. First withdrawal was $100,000, then $75,000, then $200,000, then smaller amounts. Who authorized them? We don't have the signature cards yet. Could the power of attorney have allowed it? Possibly. But where did the money come from? She turned to another page. The original account had been funded through a settlement payment from Halpern Lift Systems. That was my father's former employer. I remembered that company. When my father was 59, an elevator brake assembly failed during maintenance. The car dropped less than 1 floor before the emergency system engaged. He injured his back and left shoulder. He returned to work after several months and rarely mentioned it again. Apparently, there had been a confidential settlement. My father had never told us. The bank records showed that the account remained nearly untouched for years. Then, 6 years before his death, withdrawals began. The same year, Melissa lost her second house to foreclosure. The same year, Diane's husband's construction company avoided bankruptcy. I felt sick, but Evelyn stopped me from drawing the conclusion too quickly. "Need is not proof," she said. "Transfers are proof. Transfers prove money moved. We still need to prove who directed them, who received them, and whether your father consented." The signature documents arrived 1 week later. The power of attorney was broader than my sisters had admitted. It named both Diane and Melissa as co-agents, but either could act independently. It granted authority over bank accounts, investments, real estate, gifts, trusts, and business entities. Jonathan Calder had prepared it. Elaine Rusk had notarized it. My father's signature appeared on the final page. Again, the W leaned too far forward. Again, the R lacked the upward stroke. And there was another problem. The document was dated March 14, On March 14, my father had been admitted to Mercy Hospital for pneumonia. I knew because I had driven him there. At 10:20 that morning, according to the power of attorney, he signed the document inside Calder's downtown office. At 10:20 that morning, according to his hospital chart, he was receiving intravenous antibiotics in room 418. I still had the parking receipt. Evelyn looked at me across the table. "That," she said, "is not a concern. That is evidence. We obtained the hospital records through the estate representative. The nursing notes documented his presence in the room every hour. A respiratory therapist recorded treatment at 10:06. A physician examined him at 10:37. He could not have been at Calder's office." The notary's commission log became critical. Missouri law required her to record the identification presented and the nature of the document. Elaine Rusk's log listed my father's driver's license, but the license number was wrong by 1 digit. It belonged to a deceased man named Walter M. Mercer from another county. Calder argued it was a typographical mistake. Then Evelyn found the invoice. Calder's firm billed WMS Property Holdings for execution of POA and asset restructuring. The invoice was paid 3 days before the power of attorney was supposedly signed. The plan had existed before the document. The key remained unexplained. Midland Heritage Bank confirmed that C-17 corresponded to a compartment in its legacy vault. The box had been rented under my father's name in 1998. Because of the dispute, the bank scheduled a court-supervised opening. The morning we entered the vault, the branch manager, a bank lawyer, the temporary administrator, Evelyn, and a court reporter were present. The vault was colder than I expected. Rows of small metal doors lined the walls. Each had 2 locks. The bank used its guard key first. Then the manager handed me my father's brass key. It fit. My hand shook once as I turned it. Inside the compartment was a long gray box. The manager carried it to a private viewing room and placed it on a table beneath a camera. The administrator opened the lid. There was no cash, no jewelry, no stack of bonds. There were documents, a handwritten letter, an original will dated 12 years earlier, a trust agreement, copies of bank statements, photographs of canceled checks, a small digital recorder, and the red folder. My name was written across the front. Helen, if they say I was confused, read everything. I could not breathe for several seconds. Evelyn placed her hand near mine without touching me. The court reporter marked each item. My father's letter began with an apology. He wrote that 6 years earlier, he had agreed to lend Diane and Melissa money. Diane needed $80,000 to keep Richard's company alive. Melissa needed $42,000 to prevent foreclosure. My father helped them willingly. But after the first loans, they asked for more. When he refused, Diane introduced him to Jonathan Calder, who claimed he could create a family asset plan that would reduce taxes and simplify inheritance. My father signed several legitimate documents. Then he became suspicious. Statements stopped arriving. A bank employee called to confirm a transfer he had not requested. When he confronted Diane and Melissa, they told him he had forgotten approving it. Calder warned that challenging the transactions could trigger tax investigations and expose his daughters to financial ruin. My father became afraid. Not for himself. For them. That was how they controlled him. They used his love as leverage. He hired another lawyer quietly, a man named Raymond Beck, and created a trust that revoked prior beneficiary arrangements and divided his estate equally among his daughters, with one important condition. Any daughter who had taken unauthorized funds would have those amounts deducted from her share. The trustee was instructed to pursue recovery if evidence of fraud existed. Raymond Beck had died 2 years before my father. His small practice had closed, and his files had apparently been transferred to storage. My father feared that the original trust documents might disappear, so he placed certified copies in the safe deposit box. He also recorded several conversations. The first recording was difficult to hear. My father's voice sounded tired. Diane's voice was clear. "You approved the company structure, Dad. I approved loans. The distinction is technical. It's my money. Nobody is saying it isn't. Then return it. We can't unwind everything because you're having a bad week." My father said, "Don't talk to me like I've lost my mind." Calder's voice entered the conversation. "Walter, No one is questioning your capacity. We're discussing consistency. You've made decisions and then expressed uncertainty afterward. That creates risk for everyone. The calmness of his tone was worse than anger. He was building a story around my father while my father was still alive. The second recording involved Melissa. She cried. She said she would lose her home and possibly custody of her son if my father demanded repayment. My father told her he would help her find another solution. Then Melissa said something I will never forget. You helped Helen after her divorce. Why is her pain respectable and mine isn't? My father answered quietly. Helen never asked me to steal from myself. The final recording was made 8 months before his death. Calder informed my father that Diane and Melissa had authority under the power of attorney. My father said he had never signed it. Calder replied, your signature appears on the document, and a licensed notary confirmed your identity. My father said, then somebody forged it. There was a pause. Calder's voice changed. Not much, just enough. Those are dangerous words, Walter. At your age, allegations like that may lead people to question whether you can manage your own affairs. That was the threat, not violence. Guardianship, reputation, a legal declaration that my father was confused. The red folder also contained a letter from a bank employee named Andrea Sewn. She wrote that she had noticed unusual transfers and attempted to alert my father. Shortly afterward, she was reassigned and then terminated for what the bank called performance issues. Evelyn located her in Illinois. Andrea agreed to speak with us. She had been a relationship manager at Midland Heritage Bank for 11 years. She remembered my father because he came into the branch every month and refused online banking. He knew his balances, she told us. He knew where every dollar came from. When the first large transfer appeared, Andrea called him. He denied authorizing it. She placed an internal hold and reported potential elder financial exploitation. The hold was removed by a regional executive after Jonathan Calder contacted the bank. Calder represented several of the bank's commercial clients and served on its advisory board. Andrea was told the power of attorney had been verified. She requested a fraud review anyway. 2 weeks later, she was transferred to a branch nearly 60 miles from her home. 3 months after that, she was dismissed. Do you still have records? Evelyn asked. Andrea looked toward the window. I kept copies of my internal emails. Why? Because I knew they would say I never raised the issue. Records. Never trust one copy. My father had found the one person at the bank who thought the same way he did. Andrea's emails changed the case from a family probate dispute into something larger. The bank had known. At least 4 employees had discussed the suspicious transfers. One compliance officer recommended freezing the account, pending an in-person interview with my father. The recommendation was overruled. A senior vice president wrote, Client counsel has confirmed authority. Avoid unnecessary escalation. Client counsel was Jonathan Calder. Evelyn brought in a forensic accountant named Marcus Lee. He traced the money through WMS Property Holdings. The LLC purchased 2 properties. One was transferred to a company controlled by Richard. The other was sold, with proceeds sent to Melissa's personal account and to Calder's firm. Additional money paid credit cards, private school tuition, a boat loan, and legal fees. Nearly $487,000 had been removed from my father's investment account. Another $92,000 had been borrowed against the house through a line of credit, opened using the disputed power of attorney. The beneficiary deed would have transferred the house to Diane and Melissa at death, leaving the debt inside the estate while giving them the property outside probate. It was elegant, professional, and almost a complete. The only thing they had not found was the evidence in the watch and the vault. Once they learned the box had been opened, the pressure increased. Diane came to my house on a Sunday evening. She did not call first. I saw her through the front window, standing beneath the porch light in a cream coat, holding a paper bag from a bakery we both liked. For a moment, she looked like my sister again. Not an opposing party, not a name in a subpoena, just Diane, who once slept beside me during thunderstorms. I opened the door but did not invite her inside. I brought the almond cake Mom used to buy, she said. That bakery closed 10 years ago. The new place uses the same recipe. I said nothing. She looked past me into the hallway. Can we talk privately? My lawyer advised me not to discuss the case. I'm not here about the case. I'm here about us. There is no us separate from what happened to Dad. Her expression tightened. You think you know everything because you found a box. I know enough. No, you know documents. You don't know what it was like when Dad called Melissa 6 times in one night and forgot he had already spoken to her. Did that happen before or after you took his money? He offered to help us. He offered loans. He changed his mind constantly. The hospital records show he wasn't in Calder's office when the power of attorney was signed. She looked away. That was the first time I saw her composure fail. Only for a second. Calder handled the paperwork, she said. You used it. We trusted him. You received the money. Richard's company had employees. Families depended on it. So Dad's future was expendable? He had more than he needed. The sentence settled between us. There it was, the belief beneath everything. He had more than he needed. As if that gave them permission. As if careful saving were a moral failure. As if their urgency had converted his property into theirs. Diane's voice softened. We can still resolve this. Calder can structure a settlement. You'll receive more than you would have under the old will. I don't want more. Then what do you want? The record corrected. You want to humiliate us. I want the truth documented. Our children will read about this. They should know what happened. She stared at me. You always thought you were better than us. No. I thought Dad was safe with us. That hurt her. I could see it. But pain is not the same as innocence. She set the bakery bag on the porch railing. If you continue, Melissa could go to prison. She should speak to her attorney. You could stop this. No, Diane. You could have stopped it 6 years ago. I closed the door gently. My knees began shaking only after the lock clicked. I was not brave, I was careful. The civil complaint alleged breach of fiduciary duty, conversion, fraud, undue influence, civil conspiracy, and financial exploitation of an elderly person. We also challenged the beneficiary deed, the line of credit, and the validity of the power of attorney. The judge froze assets connected to WMS property holdings. The bank initiated its own investigation after Evelyn notified federal regulators. Jonathan Calder withdrew as my sister's attorney, claiming a potential conflict. He hired separate counsel. Diane and Melissa blamed him. He blamed them. That was when their alliance began to fracture. During Melissa's deposition, she admitted that she had signed several transfer forms using the power of attorney. She said Calder told her everything was legal. Evelyn asked, did Walter Mercer personally instruct you to transfer $200,000 to WMS Property Holdings? Melissa looked at her attorney. He told her to answer, no. Did he authorize the payment of your credit card balance? He knew I was struggling. That was not my question. No. Did he authorize the purchase of property later sold for your benefit? I don't remember. Evelyn placed a bank form in front of her. Is that your signature? Yes. Beside the line stating the transfer was for Walter Mercer's benefit, Melissa began crying. The deposition paused. When it resumed, her answers changed. Calder had created WMS Property Holdings. Calder instructed her where to sign. Diane handled most communications. Melissa believed the money would eventually be treated as an advance on inheritance. Did your father agree to that? Evelyn asked. I thought he would. You thought he would, or he did. Melissa whispered, I thought he would. Diane's deposition was different. She remained composed for nearly 4 hours. She described my father as forgetful, inconsistent, and emotionally dependent. She said he approved the transfers but later regretted them. Then Evelyn showed her the hospital timeline. Diane said the power of attorney may have been signed on another date. Evelyn showed her Calder's calendar. The meeting appeared only on March 14. Diane suggested the calendar entry was wrong. Evelyn showed her an email Diane had sent Melissa that afternoon. POA finished. Calder says we can move ahead. Diane read the email silently. Evelyn asked, where was your father when you wrote this? At the hospital. Did he sign the document at the hospital? I don't recall. Were you present? No. Then how did you know it was finished? Jonathan told me. Did you ask how your hospitalized father had appeared in his office? Diane's attorney objected. The question was still answered, no. Then came the email that ended her credibility. Andrea Sloane's files included a message Diane sent Calder after the bank placed the first hold. Dad is denying the transfer again. We may need the capacity route sooner than expected. Diane claimed capacity route referred to medical assistance. Evelyn produced Calder's reply. I agree. Guardianship threat may restore cooperation. Do not file unless necessary. The suggestion alone should be sufficient. The truth has a weight of its own. You can carry a lie for years if everyone agrees to live together. But once one person lets go, the full weight falls on the rest. Calder's deposition lasted 2 days. He arrived with 3 attorneys and answered every question as though lecturing a classroom. He said, my father knowingly created a family asset management plan. He said the March 14 date reflected document preparation, not necessarily execution. He said Elaine Rusk may have notarized the signature later. Evelyn asked whether a notary could lawfully acknowledge a signature without the signer appearing. Calder replied that he was not offering a legal opinion on notarial procedure. She asked whether he had threatened my father with guardianship. He said he had discussed legal options. She played the recording. His face did not change, but his left hand closed around the edge of the table. When the audio ended, Evelyn asked, what legal purpose was served by telling Mr. Mercer that reporting forgery might cause others to question his capacity? I reject the characterization. You may reject it. Did you say the words? The recording speaks for itself. Yes, Evelyn said. It does. The bank settled first. It did not admit intentional wrongdoing, but it acknowledged failures in its elder exploitation controls and agreed to reimburse the estate for the unauthorized transfers that passed through its systems, plus interest and legal fees. Andrea received a separate confidential settlement in her employment case. The bank also removed 3 executives and referred internal findings to regulators. The civil trial against Calder, Diane, and Melissa began after my father's death. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. No dramatic gallery, no television cameras, just wood benches, fluorescent light, files, and people trying to translate 6 years of betrayal into admissible facts. Samuel Price testified about finding the key. The defense suggested I could have planted it. Samuel looked at Calder's attorney and said, I taught teenagers for 32 years. I recognize an accusation disguised as a question. The judge told him to answer only what was asked. He apologized. Then he described every stitch he had cut. Andrea testified about the bank's internal warnings. Marcus explained the money trail. A handwriting expert concluded that my father's signature on the power of attorney was not genuine. The expert identified inconsistent pressure, unnatural pen lifts, and copied letter forms. Elaine Rusk invoked her right against self-incrimination. The court permitted the jury to hear that she would not answer questions about the notarization. My father's recordings were admitted after the court found they were lawfully made under Missouri's one-party consent rule and properly authenticated. Hearing his voice in that courtroom was the hardest part, not the money, not the lies, his voice. Tired, controlled, trying to protect daughters who were using his love against him. I testified last. Calder's attorney asked whether I resented my sisters because they spent more time caring for our father. No, I said. You lived 30 minutes away and visited twice a week. Yes, Melissa handled daily needs, many of them. Diane coordinated finances. She involved herself in them. He paused. Isn't it true that you felt excluded? Yes, he seemed pleased. Then this lawsuit gave you a way to regain control. No, what did it give you? A way to preserve evidence, he asked, whether I wanted the house. I said I wanted the unlawful deed canceled. He asked whether I wanted money. I said I wanted the estate restored. He asked whether I hated my sisters. I looked at Diane and Melissa. Diane sat perfectly still. Melissa's eyes were red. No, I said, that would be easier. The jury found Diane, Melissa, and Calder liable for fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, conversion, and conspiracy. The court voided the power of attorney, beneficiary deed, and home equity loan. It restored the house to the estate. Calder was ordered to disgorge the fees he received and pay substantial damages. His law license was suspended pending disciplinary proceedings, and the evidence was referred to the state attorney general and federal investigators. Several months later, he was indicted on charges related to wire fraud, bank fraud, identity fraud, and exploitation of an elderly adult. Elaine Rusk entered a plea agreement and admitted she had notarized documents without my father present. Melissa also entered a cooperation agreement in the criminal investigation. She avoided prison but received probation, community service, and a restitution order. Diane refused to cooperate until the week before trial. She ultimately pleaded guilty to 1 count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud. She served 8 months in a minimum security federal facility. I did not celebrate. There was no moment when music played and everything felt repaired. Justice is not repair. It is a boundary placed around the damage. The estate recovered most of my father's money through the bank settlement, property lien, insurance coverage, and Calder's assets. After taxes, legal costs, and restitution adjustments, the trust was administered according to my father's instructions. The amounts Diane and Melissa had taken were deducted from their shares. Melissa received very little. Diane received nothing after the judgment offsets. My own share was enough to change my life, but not in the way people imagine when they hear the word inheritance. I paid off my mortgage. I reduced my hours at the hospital. I replaced the roof before it leaked. I created a small scholarship at the technical college my father attended. It supports older students entering elevator maintenance, electrical work, or building systems after losing a job or changing careers. I named it for both of my parents. I kept my father's house for almost a year. At first, I thought I might live there, but every room held too much history. My mother's voice, my father's footsteps, the estate sale stickers that had left pale squares on the wood. Eventually, I sold it to a young couple with 2 children. They promised nothing, and I asked for nothing. But during the final walkthrough, their little boy ran down the basement stairs and asked whether he could build a train table near my father's workbench. I told him yes. I told him it was a good place for building things. Before the sale, I removed the piece of plywood covering the wall cavity. Inside, I placed a note. Not money, not another key, just one sentence. Keep records, tell the truth, and never confuse love with permission. Then I sealed the wall. Samuel returned my father's watch after the trial. I had it repaired by a watchmaker who preserved every scratch. He replaced the internal spring, but kept the old leather strap in a small display case. The brass key rests beside it. The watch now keeps excellent time. I wear it on important days, not because it is valuable, because my sisters were wrong. It was never just an old watch. It was never Father Final Witness. Melissa wrote to me about 6 months after her sentencing. Her letter was 8 pages long. She apologized, then explained, then apologized again. She described panic, debt, shame, and the way Diane and Calder made each step seem temporary. Just one signature, one transfer, one adjustment, one more month. I understood how it happened. Understanding is not forgiveness, but it may be the road toward it. We speak occasionally now, carefully. There are subjects we do not avoid, but we also do not force. She works at a nonprofit that assists seniors with transportation and bill management. Whether she chose that work from guilt or growth is not for me to decide. Diane and I have not repaired our relationship. She sent me a birthday card last year. There was no message inside beyond her name. I placed it in a drawer. I did not throw it away. Some doors should remain closed until the person on the other side understands why they were locked. I still live in my brick house. The kitchen is no longer too quiet. I adopted an older dog named Mabel who snores beneath the table and believes every grocery bag contains something for her. I planted lavender along the back fence and tomatoes near the porch. I travel once a year, usually somewhere calm. Last autumn, I took the train to Chicago and spent 3 days walking through museums alone. For the first time, being alone did not feel like being left. It felt like having room. Money did not give me that. Truth did. My father spent his life repairing elevators. He understood that safety depends on systems most people never see. Cables, brakes, inspection logs, backup mechanisms. Families have hidden systems too. Loyalty, guilt, silence. The roles we assign one another when we are children and continue performing long after they stop being true. Diane was the responsible one. Melissa was the fragile one. I was the difficult one because I asked questions. Those roles protected the wrong people. What saved me was not anger. It was patience. A photograph taken before leaving the estate sale. A parking receipt kept in a drawer. A nurse's note written at 10:06 in the morning. A bank employee who saved her emails. A retired teacher who did not throw away a strange key. A father who understood that when powerful people control the official story, you keep another copy. I used to believe betrayal arrived loudly, a confession, a slammed door, a voice raised across a table. But the most dangerous betrayals can sound reasonable. We're simplifying things. We're helping. He has more than he needs. Don't upset him. Let the professionals handle it. Family should not involve lawyers. Those sentences are not always wrong, but they should never replace evidence. My father did not leave me a lesson about wealth. He left me a lesson about worth. A person does not lose ownership of his life because he grows old. Love does not become authority simply because it calls itself concern, and keeping peace is not the same as accepting a lie. I did not just recover an inheritance. I recovered my father's voice. I recovered the truth of who he had been in his final years. And somewhere between the bank vault and the courtroom, I recovered something in myself too. I stopped apologizing for noticing what did not add up. I stopped believing that calm people were always honest. I stopped confusing forgiveness with access. Most of all, I learned that freedom does not always look like a new life. Sometimes it looks like sitting at your own kitchen table, drinking 1 cup of coffee, and knowing that 1 cup is enough. So tell me, what would you have done if a stranger returned a $40 watch and the key hidden inside exposed the people you trusted most? Would you have taken the settlement to keep the family secret, or would you have followed the evidence no matter where it led? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if this story stayed with you, please